Student loans have been a growing burden for every generation of Americans, but beyond the policy questions of debt forgiveness, the basic question of tuition costs remains a critical topic, and the Peter G. Peterson Foundation is out with a new tool designed to help prospective students figure out the affordability and potential return of certain programs. To walk us through the Student Debt Smarter tool, let's bring in Sheila Bair, former FDIC chair and senior advisor to the Peter G. Peterson Foundation for Student Debt Smarter. It's great to have you on the program, Sheila. Tell us a little bit about this tool, how it works, what are the inputs that students can use and put into this tool, and what type of information do they get out?
So it's very, very simple to use. We tested it with a lot of high school students before launching it. Basically, just 4 basic inputs: where you'd like to go to school, where you think you'd like to go to school, what you think you want to major in, when you want to start school, and where you think you want to live after you graduate. And with all that information, the calculator can calculate your likely income after you graduate, your likely expenses based on where you want to live, and then it will deduct all those expenses, and from that, tell you how much debt you can afford. And it includes entertainment expenses, all these things, and expenses. And then if you then you have it'll reverse engineer basically and tell you how much total debt you can take out with an affordable payment, and then still have a little money left over for discretionary purposes. So it's very, very easy to use. It doesn't require personal information. It doesn't require financial information. It's just for families and their children. Nobody's going to sell the data, share the data, whatever. And it's different from other calculators in that regard, because it really tells you how much you should borrow, not how much you can borrow. So many of the calculators now try to really, they almost encourage kids to maximize borrowing. And there's not a lot of transparency around this process, which is really a challenge. There have been studies that show some freshmen don't even know they've taken out loans because, the language around it is financial aid. Again, the whole thing is, borrow a lot. Mm-hmm. And so what we're trying to say, no, hold on. Let's figure out what's affordable to you based on these important inputs. So I'm very excited about it. It's been carefully designed. We work with Moody's Analytics on the model, on the economic projections, and I think it's going to be really, really useful.
Can you elaborate? Can you elaborate a little bit more on the transparency bit that you just mentioned? Because, what is the need for this tool, given how we've been talking about the rising cost of college, which might not be addressed by the forgiveness conversation? Why is it that you feel like there needs to be more understanding among prospective college students over not only how much debt they're going to take on, but what's the return on that degree?
Yeah. Well, this isn't really return on investment analysis. It's whether, it's going to be affordable. So there are lots of wonderful investments. I could buy a multi-million-dollar home in California and probably be a good return on my investment, but I can't afford that. So you need to think about affordability too, and your ability to actually, service that debt capacity once you graduate. And that's really what this is about. And I do think it helps students understand these decisions they're going to be making will impact what their income is going to look like and how much debt they can service, how much they can repay once they graduate, which is really important. I don't think any of the other tools out there encourage students and their families to think in those terms, which they really should. And it's also an all-in estimate. So a lot of young people, they take out federal loans, they take out private loans. The parents take out the PLUS programs that kids usually end up having to repay too. And all these different sources can add up to quite a bit. And so this holistically says, it'll calculate the interest rates. It'll give you the subsidized rate for your federal loans. You go above that, it'll give you the higher market rate for private and Parent Plus loans. And you can say, I shouldn't take out more than $45,000 or $50,000 or whatever. So there is a need for this. Nobody else is really providing this.
Sheila, on that point, you said you tested it out with high school students.
Right.
I'm curious how that shifted their decision making and what that says about how they're thinking about taking on this debt before actually deciding which college to go to.
They really hadn't thought about it in these terms, which is one of the reasons, and they loved it. They loved the budgetary information, especially. They never really thought, if I'm going to live in New York City, my expenses are going to be a lot higher than if I'm going to live in Ames, Iowa. And then the difference in major, and look, I want all the young people to be able to pursue a major that they dream about, but they need to understand, your psychology major is not going to generate anywhere near the income that an engineering major might. That's not to say you shouldn't, but you should be realistic about, how much you should borrow to pay for that degree, knowing it's going to be a lower income, or maybe, think about a joint degree with another major that is a better income producer. So, no, I don't think young people think in those terms right now. I'm not sure to what extent they're encouraged to think in those terms, but they should, because this student debt is going to be the first time they really have an experience with borrowing. And they need to understand, yes, this is good debt. College degrees will improve your earning potential if you're at a good school with a good program and you finish. It's really important to finish. So yes, that's a good thing. It's smart debt, but you really need to look at how affordable it's going to be when you graduate, because it is going to be putting a burden on your financial future. And one of the reasons we have a student debt crisis and we have so many students in non-payment or default now, they didn't think in those terms. They just kept borrowing and they were encouraged to do so. And for future borrowers, that's one of the things we want to try to prevent.
Now, I want to shift gears. I mean, the price tag, very important, but price tags across the board, very relevant with the inflation that we're seeing right now. You have a piece coming out in Yahoo Finance about some remarks that, current Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen made about admitting that she was wrong about inflation. And she's gotten a lot of flack for that on Capitol Hill, but you say that she really doesn't deserve some of that criticism. Could you elaborate?
Well, I think she was being wonderfully candid and honest. And she's human, and there were, who's going to predict that Putin would invade Ukraine, or that China would go to such extremes on its COVID response, and that we'd have these variants that prolonged the period of time where people had to stay at home and constrained domestic production. So these are things that were hard to foresee, and good for her for admitting her. She was human, and we need that. I mean, so many. I worry, I've been in Washington in politics for a long time, since the early 80s, and my career started with Bob Dole. And I just see this trend of politicians and government leaders not taking accountability anymore. Just say, oh, no, that was somebody else's fault. She didn't do that. She owned up to it. Well, and a point of fact, this inflation problem we have is pretty much everybody's problem. We've been feeding at the trough of easy monetary policy, huge deficits for years, doubled down on it during the pandemic with the best of intentions. We wanted to help people. But this is Republicans and Democrats have been doing this, and the chickens are coming home to roost now. So let's stop with the partisan finger pointing and realize funding costs are going to go up for the government. These huge deficits, that era is over. We got to figure out how to exercise more fiscal restraint without hurting working families. So I think that's really where the debate should be. And she's been a hero on this. I mean, look what she did on financial sanctions. It's just the minimum corporate global agreement on a minimum corporate tax rate. Who would have ever thought we would have that?
Sheila,
so I applaud her.
So we can applaud just how candid she is, but if you're a consumer paying for the higher prices, it doesn't really matter who is right or wrong. It's what's actually going to happen next. I mean, you said that more fiscal restraint needs to be exercised. What is that next lever you think from an administration standpoint that needs to be pulled that can have an immediate impact on inflation?
Well, I think there are, and I listed some of these in an op-ed you'll be publishing later today. But you need to, energy costs are obviously, we need alternatives, lower cost alternatives. We're so heavily reliant on carbon fuels and imports of carbon fuels. So we need to, we need to be careful of the transition. We need to make sure there's plenty of domestic production now to ease price pressures. But longer term, we need to have more affordable renewable energy sources. Prescription drugs, semiconductors. She's sponsored initiatives and pushed for initiatives in all those areas. Housing supply as well. The administration has come out, with housing costs. I mean, one of the reasons you're seeing these huge, I said a while back, I don't think inflation is going to peak until next year. One of the reasons is the housing costs are not fully reflected in these numbers we're looking at. They use a rental equivalent. It's only put in every 6 months. There have been huge increases in housing. Heavily supply constrained. That's been a problem for a long time. So we need more housing stock. But these are, again, problems that have been a long time in the making. It will take, on the fiscal policy side, it takes time to get those implemented. Short term, the Fed is really the place you got to go. And the most important thing both she and President Biden have said is we're going to back the Fed. And this could cost them politically because we're going to have an economic slowdown, hopefully not a recession. But they've said we're going to respect the independence of the Fed and support the Fed for needing to do what it needs to do. So I think there may be more things you can do on trade. She's also been bravely spoken out about some of these trade barriers, including from China, are attacks on consumers. Those are contributing to increased cost. So there are some other tough political decisions that could be made that would help, in the nearer term with these problems. But longer term, it's going to be, we're going to be living with this. And the Fed's really the main lever we have to fight this.
And we do know that there is another Fed meeting coming up on Wednesday. So we'll hear very soon from Jay Powell about his next steps. Former FDIC chair and senior advisor to the Peter G. Peterson Foundation for Student Debt Smarter, Sheila Bair. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend.